business questions offline.
Oh, okay.
All right, well, we are ready to get started. I call the meeting to order. Good evening and welcome to the April 6, 2026 study session of your Ashland City Council. This evening we have two agenda items. The first is a status update on the Madrone Ridge acquisition project. The second is a councilor-led discussion on the food and beverage tax. We'll start with the first agenda item. Sabrina.
Do we do roll call? No, not first. So tonight we're going to have Jordan and Mick and Chris Chambers kind of walk us through the Madrone Ridge project. So as a reminder, Western Rivers approached us about acquiring this using potential grant funds as a way to have control of some of our watershed, control of our view shed, and then potentially use it for expanded wildfire protection and maybe down the line recreation programming. And so I'm going to hand it over to Jordan, Chris, and Mick.
Good evening, everybody. Good to see you again.
Perfect. And just a quick Zoom check. Mick, are you hearing us on Zoom?
I can hear you guys.
Perfect. Can you see the slides?
I can't, but I have them on my other screen. So if I'm looking off to my left, you're right. That's why I'm not. It's kind of hurting my gaze.
We'll let you know where we are. Hello, Council. We're here tonight to give you an update on the Madrone Ridge project. Just a reminder of what the project is, where we are, and the due diligence we found so far. Mick with Western Rivers Conservancy is on Zoom tonight. And of course, we have Chris Chambers, our forestry officer, who is doing a lot of the on-the-ground due diligence for the city. And so we'll get going. We're going to go ahead and start with Mick. We're moving to the first slide.
All right,
And,
I can see them now.
Mick, just wondering how you would like us to do this. Would you like us to wait till the end to answer questions or as we go?
Why don't we, when I have just a couple of slides, and maybe at the end of my 3 slides, we'll take a break, and then when Chris jumps into his, we'll start again. Is that
Perfect. That sounds great.
Okay. Well, nice to see everybody. I apologize for not being there today. This is a short meeting. And so I'm at my very sunny home in Parkdale, Oregon today. Just a really quick project recap or summary. Madrone Ridge is a 1,974 acre property adjacent to Ashland's urban growth boundary, and a little bit of the property spills over into the Ashland Creek watershed. It's about 3/4 of a mile below the source point on Reeder Reservoir. That's perfect. Very close to adjacent to a lot of city land and important watershed land. It's a strategically important property. It has served as a buffer between the city and federal lands for wildfire mitigation and management. It presents a continued opportunity for improved forest management and conservation of both forest ecosystems and wildlife habitat. It has the potential to complement and enhance Ashland's existing recreation opportunities. And then just its proximity to the city in the hills to the west of the city provides the potential to keep the viewshed intact. Western Rivers Conservancy signed a purchase and sale agreement with the sellers, and we have the ability to transfer that agreement or the property itself to the city. And we would view the city as the most likely long-term owner and permanent steward for the property. We've done a number of initial due diligence steps and worked somewhat closely with the city attorney on some of that. There will be opportunity to dig in deeper with an updated phase 1 and title review. And we ultimately have until September 30th, 2027 to close on the property. Next slide, please. Just a quick overview on where the funding stands today. The overall project cost is $7,415,000. That is based on an appraisal that we had completed in July of 2024 that had determined the fair market value of the property to be $7.34 million. And then we are able to add a little bit in for additional project costs around developing a forest management plan, closing costs, phase one, that stuff. So trying to account for that. To date, we have secured $5.56 million in federal funding through the Forest Legacy Program. That is in the FY26 federal fiscal budget. And as of my last conversations with the Forest Service, is secure funding. They're in the process of working on grant agreements and going through their steps to deploy those funds. But we still need to raise an additional $1.855 million in non-federal match. That's 25% of the project costs. We recently took a swing at an OWEB acquisition grant and didn't rank in the top tier recommended for funding, but we have another opportunity to apply again in September 2026, and I'll be meeting with OWEB staff next week to help understand why we weren't ranked higher. We also have an opportunity to pursue $1 million through the Oregon Parks and Rec Department local government grant program. That is supposed to open in January of 2027, and we have a couple different strategies to make sure we don't miss out on that opportunity. And then a third potential opportunity is a program administered by Department of Environmental Quality called the Clean Water State Revolving Fund Loan, and that's an opportunity to borrow money at extremely low rates for long terms, and typically is meant to fund more infrastructure-like projects, but this right now is eligible for conservation that provides clean water benefits or wildfire mitigation benefits. Next slide, please. So some of the activities that we know would be allowed under these funding agreements, certainly increased recreation opportunities around trail connectivity, linking existing trail networks on Forest Service and city-owned land with either together or with adjacent trail networks on the Forest Service, and then very much daytime educational use. This is, I think, a really neat opportunity for research with Southern Oregon University or Ashland Public School systems that have a big piece of intact forest land in the backyard. Some things that we know would be prohibited: overnight camping or significant motorized vehicle use outside of maintenance or management activities. And then residential development would also be prohibited by the Forest Legacy Program. The intent of that is to maintain, in fact, intact forest land. So a lot to be worked out in the management planning process, but very compatible with how the city currently manages the city's forest lands. And I think Chris is next. And so that's a good time for questions.
Yes, Councilor Hansen?
Thank you, Mick. This is really exciting. I mean, this piece of property adjacent to Ashland. Can we see Mick?
I can see you guys.
I can't see you. This piece of property has been a significant question mark for the trails community in Ashland that has been, using this as nice to see you, as a de facto, neighboring piece of property. But really, it's been in private ownership for a long time, as long as I've known. But a lot of trails have been established, so there's already like a familiarity to it. I'm curious. You've done some projects for other communities very similar with private land that has been purchased by Western Rivers, unlocking connectivity, like you said, and establishing conservation easements. What does a model look like for those examples that you've worked with in the past in developing projects like this? There's been speculation of I don't know, how do we manage it between our fire department and our parks department and our community partners? What might it look like when we get closer to funding and start getting a plan together for bringing these resources together to kind of help Ashland in Ashland style relative to what you've done in other projects?
That's a good question. I've talked about this a little bit with you. The most similar project Western Rivers has done, it was a project called Nason Ridge that was in Wenatchee, on Lake Wenatchee in Chelan County, Washington. We purchased that and conveyed it to the Chelan, County of Chelan's Natural Resource Department. They manage it in tandem with a stewardship committee and just a number of other engaged stakeholders. They've raised a small endowment for the property to help offset year-to-year costs. It has some of the same conflicting uses, both conservation and recreation, cross-country skiing in this case, and not so much mountain biking. But that was resolved through a very careful management planning process with all of the groups involved, and it was a long process, but it was a really good end result. One of the concepts that we've talked about with Madrone Ridge is using some of your local existing forest management capacity, specifically with Lomacosky Restoration Group, and potentially exploring a partnership between the city and LRP, where they could potentially handle some of the day-to-day management of the property in exchange for having a consistent place to train some of their new staff each spring. I think that would be an excellent partnership to explore further.
Okay, that's great. And when that transition is apparent, will Western Rivers be part of the team to help bring together stakeholders to get us to this planning stage that will get us to partnerships? Or is your intention to try to procure the property, hand it over to the city, and then you're out?
We would be more than happy to stay engaged and work with the city and any other partners to get the trajectory set and the management planning process well underway. Great.
And we talk about those two uses, but I'm curious if there's other ideas that you've kind of baked into this business model aside from conservation, wildfire, and mountain biking. Are there other uses that you've thought would be appropriate for this project?
Well, I think one of the bullet points in the material you guys were supplied includes looking at a long-term planning process more in depth. My reaction is that this should be a community-led discussion. We would look carefully at what would work for the community, for the property, meet the requirements of the funders, and ultimately that's going to shake out what the best uses are for the property, in my opinion.
Great, because clearly this community has a lot of trail users, not just mountain bikers, and a lot of people are excited about the project. But thank you very much, and best of luck. This is a great progress report.
Thanks.
Councilor Dale?
Thank you, Mayor. Thanks, Mick. One quick question. Just want to make sure that 7.415 is locked in on the purchase agreement and will not be changing. Is that correct?
That is what is locked in the purchase and sale agreement. It's actually, the purchase and sale agreement is for 7.34, and the additional 75,000 is project costs.
Okay. And can you give some examples of other organizations that you've worked with that may not be like a municipal government, but like say private? You'd mentioned Lomacosky. Is there some kind of setup where organizations such as that has been the actual landowner and the steward of that, and then have worked with municipalities without the municipality taking title to the property?
We've done a number of different projects with land trusts, with tribal partners, with county governments, with the federal government. The challenge with this particular project is that Forest Legacy Program funds require ultimate fee ownership by a unit of government. So it would be the city, a state agency, county government, but it couldn't go to a private group.
Why is that, Mick?
That's what Congress decided when they created the program.
Fair enough.
Councilor Kaplan?
Thanks, Mayor. Thanks, Mick. So you've talked about the management plan a bit. That's actually where I'd like to dig in a bit to visualize it a little bit more clearly. In our materials, it talks about us needing to make a decision in the next month, really about the process. I'd like to understand what is a management plan process for this kind of piece of land. How long does it take? Who's involved? We talked about some of the partners that we want to have involved, obviously an inclusive, community-driven process as well. How long does it take, and what's the normal sequence for getting that done in relation to the actual closing of the deal?
I'm going to start, and I think Chris is in a really good position to probably provide the specifics on this. The way the Forest Legacy Program works is it's federal money that passes through to Oregon Department of Forestry, and then they pass it through to the ultimate recipient, which would be Ashland as the unit of government. They are the entity that will review and approve the final forest management plan. You are fortunate that you already have a very comprehensive plan for the rest of the forest lands you own, which we've shared with ODF, and they look at what already exists as adequate. So it would be more than adequate, really. It would just be building into your existing forest management plan. Chris, you want to add anything?
Yep, I think you hit the nail on the head there with the existing forest plan, which is actually due for an update in the next couple of years. I'm working on that with the Forest Lands Management Advisory Committee. We are starting to gather data and starting to rewrite some of the chapters over the next year. We could take the direction that Madrone Ridge is just another chapter within the existing Ashland Forest Plan, and as that gets updated and brought back to council for approval, we would get kind of the twin approval of bringing in Madrone Ridge and then approving a 11-year update to the 2016 Ashland Forest Plan. So it's very timely. That would all undergo public process with public outreach and coming to council for public approval as well.
Yeah, so Chris, you didn't talk about how long it takes. What's a reasonable estimate for it?
If we just started into the planning and just did it, it would take maybe 3 to 6 months. Adding on Madrone Ridge, there's going to be a lot of interest that there wouldn't be from just our kind of run-of-the-mill forest plan that we keep updating. So I could see that tending towards more like the 6 month, maybe even a little bit longer.
And is it normal to do that management plan to add, as you said, a chapter before we've actually put together all the pieces and even approved a purchase of Madrone Ridge?
It wouldn't maybe not be normal, but I think would be acceptable in this situation where we could get what we needed to get ODF's approval to make sure that we're meeting any of the timelines that they establish for acquisition and making sure that, Mick, can you say that again, after the sale, we have up to a year to get the forest plan together, is that right?
I think there's a 4-year window after the grant agreement is signed with the Forest Service to complete all of the required elements of the grant, one of which is the forest management plan. So ample time.
Yeah, so there's no really a time constraint. It's just anything that we self-impose for getting our whole forest plan package together and getting it.
So where I'm looking for some enlightenment is that there's a lot of concern about costs, not cost of the purchase, but cost of the management. So I'm looking for, are we going to be able to get good cost, approaches and estimates and before we actually have to close on the deal?
I have a slide on that, and I will present it in just a minute.
I'll get out of the way then.
Okay. Councilor Bloom.
Great, thank you both for being here. Quick question for you, Mick. Two questions technically. One, have you had any conversations with Jackson County about them potentially being the owner of this property?
We have not engaged with Jackson County around them owning the property. There was a presentation to the county commissioners last summer to brief them on this plan. And I'm going to summarize here, but essentially they felt that they were appreciative of that briefing. They felt it was early on in the project, but they were comfortable with the concept of the city owning it and managing it for recreation and wildfire mitigation.
I'm sure they were. I'm just curious if, not to leave you hanging, right? As if you get the funding, but the city council in a year or whatever, or 2 years decides they don't want to move forward with this, lining up a backup might be helpful. And then the second question is with regard to future city councils. Let's say we move forward and acquired this property, and a future council, let's say 5-10 years from now, decided that they actually wanted overnight camping and they wanted some zip line and maybe a little bit more road access. What happens then? Does the federal government seize the land because it was federal funds? Like how does that all play out?
ODF, Oregon Department of Forestry, will be the entity charged with monitoring the future uses of the property. I have never encountered a scenario like you are describing, so I can't say that I know exactly what would happen, but I imagine there would be a lot of conversations between the state and the city to resolve whatever activities were deemed in violation of the grant agreement and the conditions of funding.
Okay, so it would be incumbent on us to make sure that that grant agreement is favorable to the city, consistent with what the grant is. The government has a habit of offering grants and then changing the terms later, or interpreting the terms differently later. So I just want to be sure of that.
Yeah, I mean, that's been my experience, is that the grant agreement and notice of federal participation will be pretty clear about what the expectations are for the future uses of the property, and the city and city's attorney at the time will agree or not agree to that.
Great, thank you, Mick. I really appreciate it.
Councilor Sherrod?
Thanks, Mayor. Hey, Mick, thank you for showing up today. Question about like price and value, both being different. And maybe you can explain to the community that's watching or that's here in the audience and talk about how we came up with that price and what was the greatest and best use that the appraiser used to come up with that value. When I look at this, I think it sounds expensive to me based on the topography, the lack of uses that we potentially have, the cost of fire insurance if it was compared to a private market comparable sales analysis. But if you have a minute or two to tell the community why this is a great value and the price is just a number, I'd love to hear that.
Yeah, it's a somewhat complicated process, and so I'll just try to...
Maybe I can clean it up a little bit. There's a lot of people in the community that think even if we get a free $7.3 million piece of land, they don't want to pay $100,000 or a couple $100,000 or whatever it is a year to maintain it. Like, how could you convince the community that this is a good investment?
Well, the way that valuation was derived was to look at comparable sales of similar sized or properties with similar attributes in the greater Ashland area. There were some sales that came in at a higher price per acre than this property, and some sales that came in at a lower price per acre. And so in the professional opinion of the appraiser, the $7.34 million is what this property is valued at compared to other similar properties in the region.
If I could just pause you right there, Mick. May I? Sorry. Were they looking at the comparable sales with the multiple potential residential uses on this property, or were they looking at comparable sales that were also severely deed restricted?
They were looking at comparable sales in terms of physical attributes, potential home sites. I think they are required to have at least 6, and then they sort of track to the middle of all of that when they set their appraisal. But one of the factors, and I think this is where you're going, one of the factors that contributed to that valuation is the potential to develop 15 home sites on this property, and how that would influence the value to a developer.
Okay, and then Mayor, if I can just have one more follow-up, and I want to support this. I'm like, help me get there. If for any reason we do not get those secondary grants that you're hoping to get over the line, is there any clause in the current contract to maybe renegotiate the prices? I mean, since 2024 till now, things have changed. Do we have an extension? Is there a chance to renegotiate with the seller? Like, hey, we couldn't come up with all the money. Can we get a deal?
Well, at the end of the day, all contracts are amendable, and so that the potential to have that conversation certainly exists. I guess I would say that is sort of the last option. I would rather run down all of the sources of funding first.
Thank you so much.
Councilor Duquesne?
Thank you. Thanks, everybody, for being here. Quick question, Mick, going back to the money. Money value, I like the word value, and it sounds like in the grant writing of this, all grants have criterias. And I heard you mention the building and what is expected maybe in the long run to build on this property. Building on that property, the city would do the infrastructure for that? But I thought we were building on the property eventually. Nope, no buildings?
No building.
Okay, that's good to know. Okay, so I'll back that up. But tell me about the grants, though, because grants do have criteria. And then we would get the remaining 25% of this from grant writing. How confident are you that this grant writing will come to fruition, this money?
I'm optimistic it will happen. This is a good project. This is an important property to conserve. It has a lot of attributes, both from a wildlife habitat perspective, a clean drinking water preservation perspective, and wildfire mitigation perspective, and recreation. And I think those suites of attributes lend itself well to some of the programs that exist in the state of Oregon to secure the rest of the funds.
Well, I
You know-
appreciate your optimism because I remember when you brought this to us the first time, and I was not optimistic about the grants because of the federal administration and where it is right now. So I think that this is just still, we're in a very precarious situation surrounding this. So I appreciate your optimism. However, I can't say I'm that optimistic about this. Thank you.
All right, so I think we are back to the slideshow. Chris is picking up from here. Thank you, Mick.
Yeah. Well, actually, I can have my own, so just go ahead to the next one. Thank you. Okay, I am going to start out talking about recreation as well, and kind of taking up where Mick left off on the trails and also connecting to some of Councilor Hansen's comments. Trail connectivity is going to be a part of this. It probably won't be, it's not going to be the predominant use of the property, but at the same time, as Councilor Hansen pointed out, there are existing trails, and those are the black and white lines there over the orange, which is the Madrone Ridge property. That constitutes about 300 acres out of the 1,974 acres of the property. So it's about 15% of the property area. And the reason why that area is important is because those are the trails that lead back to Ashland. If you go over the ridge to the other side, you end up at the top of Ashland Mine Road. The neighbors don't want us over there, and it's a long ride on a mountain bike on pavement to go all the way down Ashland Mine Road, hit North Main, and then go back into Ashland. Most mountain bike riders don't want to do that long ride on pavement. They would rather stay on dirt, get all the way back to town, and pull up to Scout and have a beer. But that is the side of the property that already has existing trails, which can be upgraded, made into a sustainable trail network, and also that lead back into the Ashland Watershed existing trails network of approved trails. So all those would have to go through a trail approval process, as we currently do with trails. They would go through design and submission to the Ashland Parks Commission, and then eventually get approved and constructed by user groups, as we currently do with our current trails out there, either on Forest Service or on city. Works the same way.
Councilor Bloom?
Yeah, just a question about the trail element. So I'm curious what kind of, because I haven't seen any conversations happening with the Parks Commission in the last 9 to 10 months or so about this project. Is there, I'm hoping that sooner or later there's going to be a conversation with them before we even make a decision, because ultimately if they don't want to take this project on, and they certainly don't have the budget for it, it helps us to make, it informs our decision as well.
Absolutely, that'd be part of
Unless
the
you have
planning process.
updated information and have talked to.
We have a
Parks
trail.
Director.
We have an internal staff meeting about trails coming up next week with Parks. So
Okay.
that'll be one of the topics.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Hansen?
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I appreciate that, Councilor Bloom. Chris, thank you very much. You described a process that is relative to our existing trails within the city of Ashland. Now, riddle me this. Some of our communities, neighboring communities, and I'm going to talk about this later on, that have adopted large tracts of land for conservation and recreation, typically have not used their city parks department to maintain or develop those projects that are adjacent or, connected to side by. So from what I know, we have, we're still flushing all this out, right?
Right.
So that is not necessarily the way that we will tackle this project, which is working with the Trails Advisory Committee, through the Parks Commission, through the existing channels that we have for existing trails. It might be that the Madrone Ridge follows a different model, like our neighbors at Klamath Falls, which have purchased Spence Mountain, where they have their Klamath Trail Association designs and installs and maintains all of those trails up there for the city of Klamath Falls. So I just wanted to point out that although that may be the route, the Parks Department might not be the stewards of these trails. They might, be involved or whatever, but we don't know that yet, right? We haven't made that plan.
No, not formally, but I don't see why we wouldn't just use an existing format that has been vetted through council, vetted through the Parks Commission, used by the community, and supported by user groups ultimately, to do the same thing on property that we do outside of the city routinely. So reinventing the wheel seems like a lot of work to me.
Well,
but that would be up to the process.
But to Councilor Bloom's point, the Parks Department doesn't have discretionary money sitting around to tackle a big project like this. We have other models that other communities have used that sidestep, or rather have just the user groups, managing it, like Mountain of the Rogue in Rogue River. City of Grants Pass has other models too. So why wouldn't we? Because we don't have the budget. We might lean on Rogue Valley Mountain Biking Association, like Oak Ridge has done, where Oak Ridge has the greater Oak Ridge area taken care of by a user group like Rogue Valley Mountain Biking Association. So I think it's just interesting to point out that, although you mentioned there's an existing process, like, we don't know what involvement this project could have with our Parks Department.
I appreciate that. To be clear, the existing trails network is maintained by Rogue Valley Mountain Bike Association and Ashland Woodland and Trails Association, not Ashland
Not by the
Parks
city.
Department.
Yeah.
So there's administrative oversight to make sure that we're following our process, following the rules, but on the ground out there doing the work, it is AWTA and RVMBA.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Jordan? Appreciate that.
There's one kind of a wrinkle in this. What I've got circled in red there's a little gap that is not part of the Madrone Ridge property, and you can see all the trails kind of funnel through that one property. So it's something that we need to tackle during this process, is maybe we come up with another effort to acquire that one property. I forget how many acres it is offhand, not a lot. But topographically, everything funnels through there, and it would be hard to get around it if we didn't ultimately have permission to use that property, either through an easement or a purchase.
And is that the section of Hit Road, that city and this Madrone Ridge property?
It's not on Hit Road itself, no. It's
okay.
Hit Road is a little bit below that.
Oh, interesting.
Councilor Bloom?
So just to kind of follow up on that, so we're clear, is that all of the trails funnel through that property, and so we would either have to acquire it or get an easement, or there's no trail connectivity?
Basically, we can't throw all those trail users into a trespass situation across the
Right.
property. Once we're the owner, there's a historic trail network out there, and that owner has, either doesn't know that that's happening on that property or has just turned the other way. But once a public entity like the city owns it, we can't just lead people into private property with no other option and put them in a kind of trespass situation, unless we have some formal agreement with that property owner.
Which I do understand that, but again, we're talking about now purchasing a property, and that was never part of the conversation before.
True enough, and until that gets figured out, the recreation part of it can be on hold we can go forward with the property acquisition for all the other great reasons that we should do that, but the rec piece would have to be on hold until that gets figured out.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, moving along. Forest management. One of the reasons that the investment in forest management isn't as expensive as a lot of people think it is because there is a long history of doing work on that property. I remember one of my first projects when I first started working for the city in 2002 was working with the Hoffman family on this property with grants we had from the Forest Service. And it seemed like at the time, wow, we signed an agreement for $50,000 and that was so much money. And, I just started into this business and didn't know we were going to be spending $35 million in the future of this. But we have built that network of fields reduction over time. And most recently in the last decade with Ashland Forest Resiliency and leaning on our partners, Loma Katsi, the Nature Conservancy, and funding through the Forest Service, through the state of Oregon, even through private foundations. A lot of work has been done on that property. And in fact, about that 1,354 acres of treatment equals 69% of the property base is already in a managed status. So it's not like we're just inheriting a raw piece of property that's a bunch of brush and trouble. It is actually fairly manicured out there. We have done a lot of prescribed burning, which I have in the next slide, and we would just continue that management primarily through maintenance burning, and that would cost roughly $100,000 per year, and that will come out of the Wildfire Mitigation Fund. I just have more on the budget in another slide. So you can see just, graphically, all the yellow there represents against the orange is areas that have had work already completed, almost all that by Loma Katsi Restoration Project. So they already have an investment in the property of knowledge and their blood, sweat, and tears out there on the ground. The property is also adjacent to Bureau of Land Management. It does connect to the Forest Service up into the Ashland watershed, but the yellow off to the side there is actually Bureau of Land Management as well. So there are some connections toward talent on the off the property as well through BLM, but I think we'd find that BLM is a willing partner to participate in cross-boundary fields management as well. So that would, I think, is also a feather in the cap. All right, next one.
Before we move on, Councilor Dale had a question.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm actually going to pause, if you don't mind, to dig into that 100K in the budget slide.
Okay, yeah, great.
And I have a confession to keep this at a high 30,000 foot view for you all. I removed the specific budget slide, but if Chris can speak to it out loud, we can follow up with those details via email later this evening.
What I did on the budget slide, I could just describe it, was I went and priced out that 1,354 acres of fields reduction. Do we still have the prescribed burn footprint? There's about 350 acres of prescribed burning that was done. So in the kind of cycle of treatments, you go in, you cut a bunch of brush and thin trees, put it into burn piles, burn those piles, and then you've kind of prepped the property to get good fire back on the ground through prescribed burns or underburns. So that property went through that whole cycle, and 350 acres of the 1354 has already been maintained with fire. And the picture's not in there either. That was such a good picture. Oh yeah, we'll send it there. So we have pictures. Grayback Forestry was contracted to do the burning with funding from the Nature Conservancy, and they flew a drone and took some great pictures of the burning happening on the property. But as part of that, I've costed out just to keep that maintenance burning going for the next 10 years, how much would it cost per year? I used current costs and then used inflation going into the future. Also, for the balance of the 1354, another about 1,000 acres to just keep up the maintenance on that. Maybe we use some prescribed fire to do it. Maybe we use just some piling and burning because we don't really need to get prescribed fire everywhere to have the benefit. We end up at about $100,000 per year out of my rough estimate of the fee money that will come to the city is about $250,000 per year for forestry activities, aside from our community wildfire mitigation efforts. So it's well within our budget to maintain the property kind of on its current trajectory of fuels maintenance while using the same fee budget in the community wildfire mitigation fund to do the rest of maintenance of our forest lands, many of which are closer to town than Madrone Ridge is.
Councillor Dale?
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, so Chris, I appreciate that. So on the 100K, so you said what I was going to ask, which you accounted for inflation in the rough math. So you're telling me that 100K is fixed, or is it going to inflate over 10 years? Or you work the math backwards that we can account for a budget number of 100K a year for, let's just say, 10 years, 100K a year, period, full stop for forest management.
That was
that what
taken
you're
into account, the inflation. It's built into our current grayback contract. So I just used the same amount. They increase their prices by every year.
Okay. And then Jordan, so I appreciate you pulling that out. I think that's an important slide we probably need to get out other than just through email. This is going to be a huge community discussion we're going to need to dig into those numbers. So the question I have for you is, I see in the packet that the management plan decision is coming up next month. And so my question is, from an operations standpoint, is I guess question A would be, so that's forest management, but is that budget slide going to have, I assume it's going to have an all-in number that we need to consider? And then do we need to, would we not want to do a full financial model? Would we not want to be able to do, an operational plan, see the employees, see what it's going to take? All of that stuff we would need to be able to make an effective policy decision before we go into a master plan. This seemed kind of backwards to
So
me.
it is a awkward chicken or egg, because to be able to do the costing, we need to have a clear direction of what the property will be used for. So very clearly around what portion of it is going to be trail maintenance, et cetera. What portion of it is going to be a classroom? Do we want to put in an outdoor classroom for students to use? We need to go through the master planning process to be able to get a true picture of what our financial management numbers would be. So coming before you all, upcoming in May is, A, do you want us to spend the staff time to go through this master planning process, including the forest management process, when we'll dive into those details? The reason we're going before council is because it will take significant staff time to compile all that information for this property. And if there's not, a deep stomach for considering Madrone Ridge project, that is a checkpoint with you all to see if we should make that investment or not. The management plan is also when we're going to start talking more seriously to potential partners. So we could talk to Lomakati and we could say more formally, what would it look like if you were able to use the property, X number of days per year in exchange for maintenance? AWTA. What would it look like? Would you guys be able to sustain adding another 20 miles of trail maintenance if we were to take on this property? What we're looking direction from council is a thumbs up that you want to move forward for us to invest in the time to do the what are we going to use it for and how much is it going to cost analysis.
That's a decision.
Yeah. Thank you.
Councillor Hanson?
Thank you. We know that these lands have been maintained mostly through grants. Do we have a hard number for what the landowners have been paying for their taxes and maintenance year over year? Like, assuming the city would be in parallel with those burdens, I don't know that to actually be a real, I don't know if that's really real. Would we be paying taxes on that property as well? So do we know what the landowners were paying in taxes and maintenance?
We know the cost that was spent to do the forest management on the property. That is part of where Chris did his calculations on that 100K per year for maintenance. In terms of what the landowner themselves are paying in taxes, utilities, et cetera, I do not have that information.
Because we're paying $75,000 for 3 years of escrow, which is their taxes and their maintenance at $25,000 a year for 3 years, right?
We're paying that $75,000, and Mick, jump in where I'm wrong. That $75,000 is to have Higher Western Rivers to do a certain amount of the due diligence for us and work with us to create that master plan and management plan.
Well, I don't know about the rest of the council, but it'd be interesting to me to know what the bare bones, maintenance and overhead costs is from the Hoffmans, because I heard a number of $10,000, and I have no idea. So there's what we can do, and there's what we have to do as part of this management plan, and that's one number I would like to know. Thank you.
I don't think the Hoffmans have done a lot of maintenance per se on the property other than what we have been able to fund through grants. They've been required to pay some cost share to the grant programs, and I know that has come out of their pocket. And so that probably gets annualized into their maintenance. But the only other thing they've done is mowing on the lower property. We actually had it set up last year, but it fell through at the last minute because of early fire season, which will probably happen again this year, to actually have the Rogue Interagency Training Association, which is all of the fire departments in the Rogue Valley do annual training and are part of this association. And they want to get out and use live fire on the ground. We actually got the Hoffmans to agree to offer that property, the lower property, up for that burning simulation and training. And we had it all prepped. ODF actually went out there with their dozer and dug lines and had it all ready to go, but pulled the plug at the last minute. But the intent is to get some of that maintenance done for free. And through training, either with Lomacatsi, their partners, tribal interests are a big part of Lomacatzi's portfolio. They run tribal training crews. They have one going right now. So that would be the perfect place to have that be a functional piece of both returning tribal interests to the land out there and their historic territory, as well as getting that work done at no cost to the city. So that can come in a variety of different ways. I also didn't put in anything in terms of getting grants to help us manage the property, which we've been very successful in. I just got another one last week for $148,000 from ODF. So we continue to get money to match our own capacity. And so that's something, it's not 100%. I can't say it's in the budget for sure, but year after year, we are successful in getting that money. So I can expect that 100,000 would probably be a bit lower because of the partnerships, the training, and potential future grants.
And I just want to add real quick that to this point, Western Rivers has put $100,000 in earnest money that has gone hard, and that is intended. I don't know what their specific taxes and annual maintenance costs are, but the money that we have put in escrow or put in as earnest money so far is meant to offset those carrying costs during our option period. So somewhere in that $10,000 to $25,000 a year is the carrying cost.
So this is the last slide then? Okay, before we move on there, we have some questions. Councilor Kaplan?
Thanks, Mayor. So, Jordan, thanks for previewing what we're going to be presented with next month in terms of a decision to allocate staff time to developing a master plan. It seems quite reasonable to really contemplate that before. And that was the tenor of my questions before about how much information, how much really we're going to get before we have to make a final decision. When you come back with that, because it's staff time allocation, I'm very concerned about making sure that we are in a position to devote adequate staff time to implementation of the community wildfire protection plan that is not in the surrounding watersheds. I know that Chris is deeply involved in that as well. The part that's in the urban area, that was a new piece of this for us last year when we approved that 9 months ago or so. And I'm hoping we're going to get an implementation report sometime in the next couple of months. So in considering how much time to spend on a master plan for this very important piece, I want to make sure that we're protecting our ability to really do the work that we need to do in our urban areas, because it's pretty well, we're getting into a wildfire season. I think heightened awareness of it is the watchword. Thanks.
Councilor Bloom?
Thank you. Yeah, question for Chris. So you mentioned earlier about the $100,000, and you said it's a budget roughly $250,000. So I'm curious, because the $7 a month, roughly 12,000 utilities, that should be $2 million a biennium. Where's the rest of that? How are you utilizing the rest of that money?
Me, I'm paid out of that fund. So
right.
That's one of the things, as well as Brian Hendricks, our community fire adapted communities coordinator, is also paid out of that. So staff off the top, we're not cheap, as we all know. That is one cost, and then the rest of it is split between programs for implementing the CWPP, as Councilor Kaplan pointed out, and then maintaining our forest land inventory, which has been a cost that we've been incurring since the first money was dedicated to that in 1995. And so that's been ongoing since then, which includes a $50,000 transfer from the water fund for watershed protection. per year, 100,000 per biennium, and then over and above that is money it's been coming out of the fee for watershed maintenance since 2015, and that number has now increased because of the increased fees. So that's
Right.
where the rest of it is.
Yeah, because I'm thinking about, when we did some of the thinning up there and the helicopter logging, and it was, it was more expensive than we thought. That's normal. Some of the trees weren't as valuable as maybe we thought they were. Totally fine. I just want to make sure that you have the resources you need to be able to continue that work in the watershed to get that thinning done, because obviously the massive die-offs, I mean, I think that this is a very serious threat to the community and one that should be well-funded. And I want to make sure that we're not losing resources by chasing this property.
It's a valid point. And, we are going to have to divert some of our resources to do the needed maintenance on the property. In my opinion, it's worth it. The strategic importance of this property outweighs a lot of our other property because of where it sits in relation to the dominant weather pattern during the summer. An OSU report, which we have on file and I could share, boils it down and shows that there's really one critical block to protecting Ashland from wildfire when we get our kind of normal summer winds or up valley winds, which is 99% of the time, and it zeroes in on this property. So it really is important. It's what happened during 1959 when fires started down near the car dealerships at the bottom of the hill. Fires burned up through this property. So this property has burned in, a kind of relatively recent wildfire in 1959. And actually ended up being called the Ashland Watershed Fire, about 3,000 acres, and it was stopped in the lower watershed just outside of where the current property boundaries are.
Great, thank you.
So Chris, I have a follow-up question to that, because that was going to be one of my questions, is that it's not, the risk is not equal on all sides of our community.
Nope.
And up to this point, we have dealt with a single landowner for all of this property. So sitting on the other potential for where this goes, because they obviously want to divest of the property, they're going to sell it. So sitting on the other side, is it correct that we should be understanding this, that at some point, if we didn't go forward with this, we might have to try to work with 15 different landowners, some of which could simply say no, they don't want any work done, they're out in the county, there are no ordinances, there's no requirements for them to do any fuel hazard reduction work, right? So is that what the sort of the alternate future for that particular piece of property looks like? Am I understanding that correctly?
That is absolutely correct, and it is really challenging to work. The easiest thing is if we have the property, then we just execute our management plan. If we working with one family has been really easy, but working with 15 different families becomes really difficult. And as you said, there are no requirements. Everybody's just participating under good faith. There's no way to make them do the maintenance that needs to be done. And it also, and if you want to call Chief Shea up, he can talk more about this, feel welcome. But it puts our firefighters in a dangerous situation because where that property is located is at the end, basically at the end of a dead end road. And to put 15 more houses on the hillside up there, those are houses that we are going to have to protect with our firefighters, though it is outside the city with mutual aid agreements. We're going to be the first responders to get there. And that's a really precarious place to try to be defending homes and resources up there. Even if we're doing good property maintenance and the best of scenarios, it's still not a place where we want to have additional houses because that draws fire protection away from the city. You have to imagine that any fire that's threatening 15 houses up there is also threatening houses within the city of Ashland or about to threaten those houses and our watershed. So we don't want to divert those resources to protect more homes outside the city when we should be protecting our own city and our watershed.
And also just one last question, and that is that when we look at fire starts in places that are inhabited by people versus wildlands, there's a much higher number of starts that happen in places where people are living, where they're driving on the roads every day, sparks happen, that kind of thing. That's something else we should think about as well. If we had a number of different families up there, just their living there increases the risk of a fire start. Is that correct?
That is absolutely correct.
Councilor Hansen?
Thank you, Mayor. Chris, I've heard you describe this Madrone Ridge project as part of building a moat around the castle and Ashland being the castle and the moat being our watershed. Could you describe, I mean, it's pretty obvious, but could you just tell us what you mean by that?
Absolutely. And the work that we've done under Ashland Forest resiliency over the last 15 years has really been an example for the whole country, and it's really been seen that way. We have built a network of fields reduction that goes all the way from the Siskiyou Summit. So we have a 59,000 acre project area that goes from the Siskiyou Summit to Wagner Creek. Within that area, we have done over about 14,000 acres worth of field reduction. That gets us about, well, it's actually 52,000 forested acres, then there's houses and pavement and stuff in there too, but that gets us close to 25% of the area under management and field reduction. That's really good. In some sections, like if you kind of carved out the lower watershed, it's a lot higher than that. I said Madrone Ridge was 69% managed. We want to try to keep that percentage as high as we can. Most of the research says if you can get to 40% for high value landscapes, you're doing a really good job. So we want to keep, pushing that forward and not backslide by not maintaining the acres that we've been able to accomplish, but also to maintain the really critical acres where we know that if a fire comes, that's going to be one of the lines in the sand that we need, or the moat around the castle to protect it. And so that is part of the strategy. It's a very active strategy. We actually map it every year, put in the new treatments, maybe take out stuff that aged out. So far, I haven't taken much out. And that goes into our command vehicles. And so we show up on fires. We have this giant size map that goes out. We're also working on getting it it is in GIS, so we're working on how we translate that digitally into the field, into a model where if you can actually, put people on the landscape and choose where we're going, because we've really pre-planned an entire landscape, which is pretty remarkable.
Very cool. Thank you.
Other questions? I have one last follow-up, and that is communities across the West are now having to deal with the reality of wildland fires in a different way than they had in the past. And Ashland has in many ways been out at the front end of that, particularly with our watershed work. Do we have any sort of a sense of the increased need for training of people who might come in for training? Because part of what I'm looking at for the May conversation is not only what does it cost, but what might offset those costs. And it seems to me that there's going to be a very high demand for experienced practitioners to show newer practitioners in the wildfire space not only how to do prescribed burning, but also how to manage landscapes in the way that we have around our community. So are you in conversations that give us any kind of an idea of what that kind of demand signal might look like?
Absolutely. Actually, Southern Oregon Forest Restoration Collaborative, where I'm on the board, is working regionally with a vision to increase the treatment footprint in the Rogue Valley from 15,000, or the Rogue River Basin, from 15,000 acres a year to 100,000 acres a year. That's a massive scale up, and one particular piece of that is scaling up the workforce in order to do it. So they've already built in partnerships with the Rogue Workforce, forgetting the last part of their name, out of downtown Medford there, to actually start building curriculum around that. There's actually a high school curriculum already built that our staff has worked on, and it's being implemented across the valley already. So we're already trying to make that push to get more people engaged, more people who want to study forestry and wildfire, more people who want to work on engines and develop crew capacity. Honestly, Lomacati has been a great incubator of businesses, as well as a nonprofit, but they've spun off numerous staff that have created small businesses, and then Lomacati will contract with that small business to go out and support prescribed burning, to do some of the work that Lomacati just doesn't have the capacity to get to. So there's a vision to really probably quadruple down on that, and to create a pipeline, much like there's an effort to do that in healthcare, but the same thing for forest restoration and fuels management, that we're really going to have a lot more of our workforce involved in that and teaching them those skills. versus traditional forestry, because it's a different way to look at the landscape. And I think this creates an opportunity, and SOU came out on one of our field tours and they were very excited. They've submitted a letter of support for the project and trying to create some kind of an institute where students would be continually engaged and they would have monitoring data and they would follow through on that year after year after year. So there's a lot of potential for this property for workforce development as well, and education is a big piece of that.
So if there are no additional questions, in terms of staff direction, I heard a couple of suggestions, so I want to circle back and see if it's the will of the council to provide these specific pieces of direction. I heard one, that we want to have to try to get some kind of a sense of the bare maintenance costs, so that when we're thinking about this moving forward in some way, we have some kind of an order of magnitude understanding of just basic maintenance costs of that property. Does that sound like something that we would want to see in May? Councilor Bloom?
Just to clarify, we're just talking about the forest management side of those basic costs.
Yeah.
At this point.
For
Yeah.
just the forest
Ju-
management
just-
side?
yeah.
Okay.
So that would be the direction. We have trails in that space, but we're not maintaining them at this moment. Right? So I think what we're looking for in this question coming up to, do we continue down this road, is at the end of the day, if there were no trails, if trails weren't, if we decided we can't make the recreational piece of this work and it's really just a fire circumstance, then what is the annual sort of nut to the city that we'd be looking at? So it sounds like we do want that. Is that right? And then there's maybe a question about an additional parameter.
Well, if I may ask, Mayor, so it was my understanding from Jordan that, and possibly Sabrina, that all of those were going to come. I mean, I guess I'm not understanding, because how much of this work, you said it was going to take significant staff time. You want to find out what we want to do with it. Is what you're asking for is, do we want to use it for forest management as part of the master plan? I guess I'm confused at the order of operation of what you are investigating as far as staff time and costs. Because if we're going to go, I'd like to learn all about it and understand it. If it's just the forest management, sure, but that's in a vacuum to me.
Yeah. What I'm hearing, and what we can do, is we can bring an estimated cost for specifically forest management. We will not be able to bring forward costs of what it would cost to maintain the trails if we didn't have a trail partner to do so, what it would cost to invest in the educational infrastructure if we want to have an outdoor classroom for that forest training. But what we can do is, using our historical data of how much it has cost us to invest in the mitigation work that has done, we can use that as a ground-based estimate. I would say, after you get that info, to decide if you want to spend staff time to do a deeper, more complex analysis, that is what I would then do after council direction.
Right, and that's what we would be looking at. The conversation in May is going to be to this council: do you want to continue to invest in a deeper dive look? We heard a $100,000 number. I think we want to have more detail around that number when you all come back in May. Is that correct? Does that sound right?
Yeah, just one last clarification. Is Sabrina, is that all in city resources just for forest management?
So I think we'd be looking just on the Madrone property. You know, what did the city spend of city money versus maybe what grants we received to do mitigation on that property? So we can bring that historical data forward, and that will provide an estimate of what it will cost moving forward. And I think Chris can, show his numbers for his escalation with, Lomakatsi, for the maintenance on that property that he did to arrive at that 100K number.
So to the mayor's point, or if council so chooses, obviously it would be the number that you'll come with is what it would be and what we would understand it to be, if grants notwithstanding. I understand if we were to go forward with just this.
Yeah, so I would think this is like the
start.
The flow tree of decision making.
Correct.
Like, this is the bare minimum we'd need to do on this property if we acquire it, is the management of it for wildfire protection. The other stuff, the trails, the outdoor classroom, Those are
Understood.
kind of nice to haves that we could work towards, but this is the investment we would need if we take on this property.
All in enforcement. Okay, thank you.
And that would include the background information of what has been done, but also the understanding that we're in a maintenance phase, which means that we're not going to simply project what has been spent forward, but we're going to be looking at what does the maintenance actually cost. So that is one of the elements of it. Councilor Duquesne?
I believe I heard city manager say, or I believe Councilor Dale mentioned not to include possible grants because I heard say that, historical knowledge. Well, grants that were historical are not relevant now.
Right, so it
would
wouldn't
just-
include grant
Exactly.
expectations. It would
Okay,
simply
thank
be,
you.
what is the amount of money it would take per year with our estimates to maintain what we have done up on that property, right? So that we have that information when we look at what is a deeper dive.
So Chris will
Involved.
show his work for the 100K
Chris will
per
show
year.
his work. Show your work. And then anything else that, any other costs, any other administrative costs that might be needed there. And the second one is that we would want to understand this in terms of the staff time allocation in relation to the Community Wildfire Protection Plan. That was the question that Bob had, or Councilor Kaplan had, was how do we understand this in relation to the rest of that project? Because you'd be asking for staff time. So that would be the second element that we would want to understand if that looks right to people. That's information that the council would like to see. How does that affect the CWPP? Does that sound, I've got a couple of head nods. Okay. Councilor Bloom.
Yeah, and I think it's fair to include in there too, what impact that has on doing other work up in the watershed. Because we can't count on grants and we need to continue to do that work. So I'd like to see, what kind of impact that will have on that as well.
Does that sound, the rest of the council, is that information that you would want to see? Basically, how does this fit within the scope of the larger CWPP and also within the specific elements that are just the watershed work? Okay, we've got that direction. Councilor Sherrill.
Yeah, I was just going to hone in on that a little bit and ask that if you can, when we report back, if we talk about the economy of scale, if we already have a forester working on that hillside, how much more efficient is it to just add a little bit?
Councilor Hanson.
Is this a good time to make a comment? We've been asking a lot of questions. We really have been lasered on a couple really important components of this project. I'd like to just zoom out and look at how this Madrone Ridge project would affect the greater Ashland, because not everybody in Ashland really feels like, they're hearing something for them in here. But our council priorities are laid out, and our first one is livability. We know that people move to our community for different values, and we have an existing trail network and a conservation ethic and an ecosystem that the people are moving to that they really value. And this will increase the value for people that only live here, also people that live here, but also people that want to visit and move here. So I think that this has relevance on a bunch of different levels for our livability. It's social equity too, right? This is 1,900 acres that would become public land that would otherwise be, a rich person's paradise. But then when we look at risk reduction, our second priority for council, this is reducing risk. We're not introducing new neighbors into this very sensitive area around our community. We're also managing wildfire risk on this very particular piece of property to our own liking, right? We get to do what we want to do. We don't have to worry about what a landowner might do. So risk reduction is great to the community. Economic development is our third council priority. This is something that neighboring communities are investing in land. They're investing in trail systems, they're investing in big trail systems, and they're touting it, they're singing it from the rooftops to draw people into their communities to come spend money, to move here, to, for livability's sake for the people already here. I just want to give you a couple of examples because not everybody knows. Corvallis just spent $2.1 million on a 5-acre bike park. Klamath Falls spent money to buy Spence Mountain, 7,500 acres of developed trail network just for mountain bikers right next to the city of Klamath Falls that they bought. Grants Pass just bought Dollar Mountain, 450 acres trail system that they're singing from the rooftops. Another neighbor, Sonoma County, just bought 1,500 acres for trail systems. And then Bellingham, Washington just bought 116 acres. So I think this is something that we have kind of fell into, that we should grab by the horns and really run with. And I know that there's a lot of different values and a lot of crossover here. So I just wanted to point out that, I get excited about this, my constituents do, because we're trail people and we're out there running and riding bikes. And other people are bug people or mammal people or plant people. They're going to get excited about it too. But my mother, who lives in town, could not really care about all that stuff, but she wants to sleep well at night knowing that fire reduction's been reduced. And I think everybody in our community can get behind that. So thank you for all of this opportunity. And I know it's not a done deal, but it's very exciting.
Councilor Bloom, and then we want to move on to the second item.
Yeah, I just want to say I completely agree. It checks every single box. But we also have serious budget realities that we need to face, right? And so we have to weigh what our priorities are and our values and what we're trying to do for our community against that. Is it acceptable for us to reduce parks funding to compensate? Is it acceptable for us to raise rates to compensate? Cut climate programs to compensate? We all want these different things, but there's only a finite amount of money. And so I appreciate what you say, and I agree with you, it checks every box, but we need to be very diligent about how we evaluate that.
And I think we have been we've been introducing this concept over the last bit of time. There have been a lot of conversation, a lot of really great work by Western Rivers Conservancy on it. And I think that the process that we've just gone through this evening and all these questions is a big part of that due diligence from the city side to make sure that we understand what are we taking on, what are we hoping to get from it, do we have an appropriate plan for getting to the benefits that we expect to see from this community, from this process, and is it the right trade, essentially? And so I think we've had a really good conversation here this evening. Thank you, Mick, for all of the good work that you and your team have done to get us to the point where we can have this conversation about next steps. We'll take it up again in May with some of that more specific information, as well as a better understanding, I think, of what does moving to the next step entail, not just with staff time, but with what we're going to be investigating about potential uses on the site. So very exciting time to have this conversation, and really, really looking forward to the conversation in May. So thank you for coming, and thank you for the staff presentations. I think we can go ahead and consider this agenda item finished, and we'll move on to the next one.
And I just do want to share, Mayor, we have a couple more slides. They're going to be posted this week on our major project page on our website so that the community has access to all of it. And if you all want to see those additional info, I'll send an email summarizing as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Okay, we are now on to the second agenda item, councilor-led discussion on the food and beverage tax. Did you want to open this up, Sabrina, or do we hand it straight across? I believe Councilor Duquesne had brought it forward.
I think it's probably appropriate to.
So,
Can.
Councilor, we'll start with Councilor Duquesne if you'd like to open us up.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, Mayor. So myself, I brought this up. Councilor Bloom seconded with me. I appreciate that. And before I get started, I will just thank the staff for bringing the information regarding the street fund. And when I look at the street fund, I look at under background in the second paragraph, last sentence, it says the following street fund debt serves as all services already have been secured by anticipated food and beverage tax revenue through 2030. So when I looked at that, what stuck out to me was the word anticipated funds, anticipated revenue. And we, in my opinion, we cannot do things on assumption and anticipated funds. So I was surprised to see that, and I'm just going to put this over there for now. and go through what I put together quickly for our constituents to take a look at in this body. So a little background about the F&B. The food and beverage tax applies to prepared foods, non-alcoholic beverages sold at restaurants, grocery stores, delis, caterers, and coffee shops in Ashland, including takeout food, delivery, and delivery orders. The city collects roughly about $3 million in food and beverage tax per year at this time. Notably, 25% of the money goes directly to Parks and Recs Department to support the development and rehabilitation of local parks and open spaces, and 75% goes toward maintaining and repairing our streets. The food and beverage tax history. The F&B tax was originally provided by the voters, approved by the voters in 1993 to help acquire additional land for Parks and Recs. In 2009, voters redirected 80% of the tax revenue to pay down the debt on the city's wastewater treatment plant, leaving 20% for parks. And then in 2016, voters adjusted the allocation again, increasing parks' share to 25%. The remaining 75% continued to fund the wastewater treatment debt. With an excess revenue not needed for the purpose of the wastewater treatment plant, it was redirected to the street fund. Eventually, the wastewater treatment plant was paid for. In 2023, a measure to amend the ordinance to allow funds to be used for Parks and Recs operation and extend the sunset date of the food and beverage to December 31st, 2040 failed. Today, 75% of the F&B is used for street fund, and 25% of that goes to parks. This is scheduled to sunset in December 2030. So something that I just wanted to bring this forward and talk about the F&B tax and how it can better work for the people and help take the increased rate of the water treatment plant off of the ratepayer. So the question is, how can we do that? And in doing so, I have a couple of scenarios at the bottom that was in the packet for everyone to take a look at. And I'm willing to hear some feedback on that from this body. Scenario number 1 was 25% remain in parks, 10% to the street fund, 10% for infrastructure. Why infrastructure? I say infrastructure because all municipalities need good infrastructure. I don't want us to find ourselves in the place that we are with City Hall ever again. And I would like to see dedicated money, cash flow, going to a designated fund for infrastructure, and then 55% to the water treatment plant. And scenario number 2, 25% again to parks, 10% to streets, and 65% to the water treatment plant. When I looked at this, what I think what would be food for thought for this body is to let the water treatment plant be paid off, that debt we haven't pulled from the WIFIA as of yet. So let the debt be paid through the F&B, and to be able to let this go to the people. This is a conversation between us, and then let it go to our residents who live here and let them vote on it. If and when this were to pass, then I say let's cut the progressive costs of our water rates. Because this aggressive cost of the water bill compounded with the other rates that have gone up, and the cost of living in Ashland is rough for a lot of people. For some, it's nothing. For others, an additional $50 a month can make or break you. So, thoughts?
Councilor Bloom?
Yeah, thanks, Councilor Kane, for bringing this forward. So a couple things stand out to me with the current allocation with the F&B, and that's one, the 25% to parks is specifically to capital, right? And I really don't think that the Parks Department has the capacity to be building new parks, but they have serious operational constraints, right? And so we've talked in the past about how can we help that on the operational side. So I certainly think, just kind of my thoughts is that going forward, making sure that we do that 25% for parks, but that it is directly for operations, not for capital. The second thing that stands out to me is about streets, is the amount of revenue that's coming in for the streets fund. Is that to fix potholes and maintain our streets, or is that large projects like the bike paths and painting and bike boxes and kind of redesign?
If I may.
And doing all of that?
If I may, Councilor Bloom, something that I noticed it was in the packet that I believe Jordan put together for us was a rehabilitation on Mountain and on Ashland Street, right? And so, yes. And so when I look at that, that's how come I kind of put it over there for a minute, because it's either, Councilor Hanson brought up livability is number one for our mission. So looking at livability, rehabilitation of the bike lanes, or the ability to be able to live in your house and pay your bills.
Sure.
So how do we prioritize that? Some people think it's no big deal. It is a big deal.
So
Let's let Councilor Bloom.
if I may.
Okay, go ahead.
Because I was going somewhere with this point.
Okay.
I'm kind of looking at it of like, okay, well, right now, given the budget situation we have, should we be doing these bigger projects, right? Or should we just be maintaining what we have? The amount of folks in Ashland, myself included, that's like, why did we change this? It was perfectly fine the way it was before. And it's like, oh, well, there was a special interest group that really advocated for it. And then that's millions of dollars out the window. So we need to be better stewards financially. So I question whether we need to be investing that much into streets, the 73%. So then another kind of question that I have, because I'm very interested in the capital side of things, right? And getting caught up on our deferred maintenance, making the repairs to City Hall, doing those things that we need to do. But I also understand that things come up in parks where they need some capital money. Things come up in other departments within the city where they need some capital money as well. Would it be possible through policy, through council, that a capital fund, I know we have one, but established in a way that allows for our enterprises to also pull out of those as needed? So for instance, we're talking about the water treatment plant. We see an opportunity to say, okay, well, we have this 73% in a capital fund. We need some funding and we don't really want to draw on the WIFIA. We can now then go in and pull from there. So it creates some flexibility for you guys to do the things that you need to do to stay up on our deferred maintenance and capital projects.
Go ahead, Sabrina.
So I'll have Jordan address the street thing, but I think just a point to make is that, 400,000 of the food and beverage tax is put into Parks budget for maintenance as part of their operating budget. So some of that is being used for items that don't meet like a capital project threshold, but are for facilities and whatnot at parks. So that's a significant amount. I think too, staff would never recommend using non-enterprise funds or diverting funds that are used for general fund purposes to an enterprise. The kind of standards of operating are that enterprise funds are kept within enterprises, and those funds are derived from rates.
Yeah, and I do appreciate that, but what I'm talking about is actually building up reserves in capital to do deferred maintenance. And you have situations where things break, right? Let's say at the new water treatment plant, something breaks. I get it, it's an enterprise fund. So what, do we come back and say, well, we got to raise rates so that we can cover this project because we clearly didn't budget for it, because things happen. Obviously, the financials are changing, right? And I'm talking about nationally. What flexibility exists within our budget to be able to deal with these situations instead of, well, we got to raise rates or we've got to do these massive cuts to this other thing to cover it. I mean, it just seems like we're not planning financially very well.
So this is why the enterprises have the rate studies as well as those operational studies. So you've seen that with the electric department to plan the rates to cover those, and why they have such large balances to cover emergencies.
Right. I guess I'm suggesting that maybe we don't need to constantly raise rates to be able to cover some of our needed improvements.
That would be a policy decision by council.
Exactly.
Other questions? Councilor Duquesne?
Thank you, and I'll be quick, Bob. But something that I just wanted to touch on is that was my opinion of setting aside 10% of the F&B so that we would have direct cash flow into a fund. So say the example that Councilor Bloom brought up, if something were to break, like the new water treatment plant or what have you, we would have cash flow going directly into a fund, and it's designated to prepare that. I remember, and Mayor Graham might remember, before I was here a long time ago, Mayor Stromberg started a fund, I believe, for a water fund, and it has about $20 million in it, and that's something that he implemented and put in place, a special fund, so that if and when it could accumulate and build up money. And I think that we need to start somewhere to be able to have designated funds for all the what-ifs in the infrastructure and if something is to break. And I believe the 10% out of scenario number 1 to be able to have designated cash flow into a fund to help when the what-ifs happen. So that's part of my scenario 1, Councilor.
Jordan, did you have an comment on the streets? And then we'll go to Councilor Hanson.
Some information that was asked in your question I just wanted to provide. How pavement management really works, it is counterintuitive, but our pavement management plan is we address streets before they reach the point of getting potholes, because once they get potholes, it is incredibly more expensive for us to redo them. So for example, the Ashland Street Rehabilitation Project, that is us redoing the entire surface of Ashland Street. At that time, we took the advantage and also redid all the striping and the bike lanes. But the bulk majority of that project is to make sure Ashland Street remains a great street to drive on before it develops major issues that are going to cost a lot more. And so I do want to point out, for the way we've been using the food and beverage tax for our street fund is to fund those major rehabilitation projects to maintain our streets at the level they are. If we stop doing those, there's a likelihood that we get those specific streets turning a red classification, which is where they have enough degradation, such as potholes, integrity issues. It's going to cost significantly more than if we had done their rehabilitation prior to that state.
Councilor Kaplan?
Yeah, thanks. That's very helpful, Jordan. I was going to go a little bit there in that direction and ask the question, because I hear a policy preference from Councilor Bloom to shrink the amount of money that we spend on rehabilitating our streets. Made some statements about bike lanes, which I think is just a red herring, because the bike lanes, we're not borrowing money to stripe a couple of bike lanes. It's actually an asterisk on the major rehabilitation project. So I don't know. I think being a little bit of an exaggeration is not really helpful to the conversation. But I thought I would just say that. I do think that there is I'm absolutely open to discussion about use of the food and beverage tax and whether that should be for parks, capital, those kinds of things that we're doing. It was used for funding some of the debt for the wastewater treatment plant. It could certainly be used for funding debt on something else. For me, the question is currently it's being used for major street projects. I'd like to understand how those major street projects, because I'm also very concerned about deferred maintenance. It's not just on our buildings that are deferred maintenance. Our streets are deferred maintenance too. So letting those run down imposes a great cost on our residents, including on higher costs on your cars, maintaining cars when they're over, poorly maintained streets if we let those run down. So I think I'd like to feed this conversation with how do we fund our appropriate street work if we divert this money to the water treatment plant. So I think that's part of what we need to get to. And then I wanted to pick up on Councilor Duquesne's question about the use of the securing of the debt for the next 4 years. with food and beverage receipts. So it's what I'm understanding is we borrowed against that. That means that we can't really allocate that. We allocated that money for the next 4 years through the end of its lifetime. We're not really even able to redirect that until after that because it's already tied up in securing the repayment of those loans.
Correct. And if we chose to, for example, make changes prior to the 2030 sunset date, that money would then need to be secured by the general fund.
The
on
general
its own.
fund.
We'd be
Because
paying
because that is the source of funding. If I go back in some of the conversations we had about the redirecting of the food and beverage tax towards other things, like parks operations, that meant that more of the streets debt was going to have to be paid for out of our general fund, which in fact is the fund that's the most stressed. So putting more stress on our streets, on our general fund, seems to me to be antithetical to what we're trying to do. So I think we need to look at this in a broader context. There's a lot of numbers flying around. There's a lot of ideas flying around. Some of them are not fully, supported by the data. But I would like to see, a fuller conversation about that. And I'm totally willing to have a conversation about the use of the food and beverage tax. It's something that we're going to have a conversation about. We're going to have to go before the voters in a few years anyway to see whether they want to extend it. So we should do our homework and sort out all the fact from fiction.
So we need to contract for a little bit more time if we want to go beyond 7 o'clock. Councilor Duquesne?
I would like to make a motion to go to 7:15.
Okay, a second. We don't do formal motions, but just thumbs
Yeah,
up if that
thumbs
looks
up.
good. Okay, good. We've got another 15 minutes. Councilor Hanson.
I think this is a great thing to be talking about early and often. I think F&B should be in perpetuity. It's a tax I can get behind. I love the ideas. One of the things I would love us all to start thinking about is our beloved Siskiyou Boulevard is owned by Oregon Department of Transportation. And sitting on the Transportation Advisory Committee, there's often great ideas about what to do downtown that are irrelevant to city control because we do not have control. So there has been murmurings in the Transportation Advisory Committee that ODOT would love to get rid of Siskiyou Boulevard, transfer authority to us, or somehow sell authority to us. I do not pretend to know all the nuances. That's why I always wish Scott was at every single meeting, our Director of Public Works, Scott Fleury. But we should be thinking about, there's going to be some money coming down the pipe for cities from, I believe, an EV tax or a gas tax. We're behind in our bicycle infrastructure. Talk about livability. You want to make things cheaper for people, let them ride their bikes safer. That is a big deal. If we want to put in this infrastructure, how are we going to pay for it? If we want to buy Siskiyou Boulevard and have a pedestrian mall downtown because that's what our town needs, we're going to have to do something. We're going to have to be proactive and go get that. But the state would probably love to get rid of it because it's really expensive to pave Ashland Street. We didn't pay for that. State did. There's a lot of stuff going on here. So I just want to put that in our field. Like, what are we going to do about Siskiyou Boulevard? I would love to have a pedestrian mall. Never going to happen unless we own it. So maybe we take some streets money and buy it. I'm not sure how that works.
Councilor Dale?
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, so actually, on that note, Councilor Hanson, thanks. Yeah, I'm up to the count of 3 different levels of government outside of municipalities that are willing to and are trying to offload costs onto the city. So to your point, yeah, we have to be careful what we wish for because we might just get it. I'm reminded of an otherwise snarky quote from about 50 years ago that says there's nothing as permanent as a temporary government solution. And you can lean into that at the same time, but that entails very difficult conversations. And so a corollary to that is something I learned early in this chamber was you don't pay for ongoing expenses with one-time funding. And I remember when the food and beverage tax was first voted in 1993 and 2010 seemed like light years in the future. I don't know if I got my metaphors right there, but the point being is that these are one-time funds. whether we like it or not. The sun sets at 2030. This is a question for the voters. And I was reminded very recently that services always win out to infrastructure. And so we need to take that into consideration. So to your point, Councilor Duquesne, absolutely. Do we need to look into capital infrastructure? 100%. And that is going to take some very difficult decisions. Relative to the water treatment plant, I mean, that's a one-time thing. Now, do I think that the food and beverage should do that? I'm not sure, to be honest with you. Normally, you would have enterprises pay for enterprise funds. Do I think we lean aggressively into low-income plant thing? Do we change rate structures so that we help our most vulnerable? Yes, absolutely, and as aggressively as possible. I think that's one thing to consider. But I do think that, as Councilor Bloom and others have said, the open space program back in the mid-90s was for capital acquisition. We've muddied the waters relative to that. We have operations. We have so forth. We've just mixed our funding across things. It is incredibly difficult to budget for long-term things when you don't know if that funding source is going to go away. Now, to some extent, relative to parks, and I just happen to pick parks because that was what was in there at the beginning, is you can have a sunset date to operations because it's kind of a referendum of sorts. If the voters choose not to extend that, well, then we know, and that could be, you could say that for anything else, but streets, everything else that is an ongoing thing, that has to continue. So if we're going to have this discussion, part of that discussion is you best take the date off if you want operations. I mean, that is something that the voters need to understand, and we need to have very hard conversations and be very transparent about trade-offs, because we can't have everything and not give anything up. Thank you.
Councilor Bloom?
Yeah, thank you. I agree with that. I just a couple of points is that to me, an asterisk, that's, a salary that can feed a family of four. And so I think it's important to keep that perspective that we talk about a lot of money in this chamber and we forget what that money actually represents to people who are struggling to get by. So I just wanted to make that point. The other point is I think we're jumping the gun, and I hope that it wasn't, my words weren't taken out of context. I'm not suggesting that we do this in the next few months and we put this to the voters and then we'll figure out how to pay for all this debt for streets later. I mean, there's other ways to go about it, whether it's something that goes on the ballot in 2030 or it's something that maybe goes on the ballot that says up until this date, it goes to streets, and then after that, this new model kicks in, maybe indefinitely. I mean, I think that there are ways to kind of work that language so that we're not shooting ourselves in the foot and just being kind of reactive to the situation. But I just want to say I appreciate Councilor Duquesne for bringing this up. As I was said earlier, this is a lot of money. It's very important for us being able to do the things we do in the city. And 2030 seems like a long time away, but it's really not. And so the more of these kind of little micro conversations we can have, maybe when it comes time to actually put something on the ballot, we have something that might actually pass this time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it is useful to have this conversation. It's one that we've known is coming. We've had it in various formats over the last several years. And of course, there have been efforts to have the voters change what it is used for. I think when I think about it, I am reminded that it is incredibly flexible and able to shift as the needs of the community changes. When it was put towards the wastewater treatment facility, that was what made the most sense in that time for the people who were here and the people in the community. I think our circumstance is very different now with the strain that we have on our general fund. I would be very hesitant to look to moving money from the general fund into an enterprise fund. And at the same time, I appreciate that we are looking for ways to create facilities funding. We are looking for ways to solve some of these other issues. We're looking for ways to get to operational expenses for parks. I think this is an important conversation for us to have in the context of the larger conversation we are having, which is how do we address deferred maintenance? How do we address this ongoing vice of local government with the resources that we have to provide the services that we provide? And so I think it makes sense. I want us to be very careful not to create another system of deferred maintenance in order to solve one other one. So we need to really understand that. I think it would be useful for us to get a briefing from Public Works works, about how the street program works, how they decide what to work on next, how that financing process works currently with the food and beverage tax, so that we're all working with the same base understanding of what we might trade away from it. And then also to understand, what do we think a facilities fund should look like at the point where we get the facilities up and running and to kind of a start point for maintenance. We know we're not going to make all of these repairs. We're not going to do this within the general fund. We're going to have to ask the voters for money to make the repairs. But once we get there, what is it that is needed going forward for making sure that we don't get back into a deferred maintenance situation? And can we potentially back into some of these numbers through the food and beverage so that we've got dedicated, internally restricted money for the things that tend to get traded away, right? So I think these are really big conversations for us to take up. Councilor Duquesne.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for your input. I appreciate that, but I'd like to get back to the people of Ashland. Once again, I look at the water, our water rate is a progressive increase. And so, and I know that this just started, but when I listen to the people who live here, and we are all contacted by our residents, and when I look at the progressive rate of the water, the electric rate, everything just going up on just the cost of living right now itself, it's hitting people hard. And yes, this is one-time money, like Councilor Dale said, but you know what this one-time money paid for the wastewater treatment plant? Let it pay for the water treatment plant and take some of this financial burden off of our residents. That's why I bring it up, and that's why I'm here. We talk about streets. Yes, Siskiyou is owned by ODOT, and so is a big part of Ashland Street. So let's look at the numbers and let's get real. I look forward to that, and part of the next steps in this is to be able to look at the numbers. I ask in this packet request is to bring this back in August. So I would like to bring it back in August, working with our Public Works Department to say this is what this looks like and this is what this looks like. Because if we don't actually look at how it hits the residents, that's what I'm talking about. It's nice, yes, 10% infrastructure, I'm all for that. Streets, I'm all for that. And Siskiyou is owned by ODOT, and a huge part of Ashland is owned by ODOT. So let's look at it realistically, and let's look at it and see how it hits your average everyday Ashlander.
Councilor Kaplan.
Thanks. Councilor Duquesne, you've said this twice about our progressive rates, but I'm trying to understand what you mean by that. Do you mean that if up to now 500 cubic feet instead of 350 cubic feet, or up to 500 cubic feet, it's one price, and then it's another price for those who consume the next tier, and then the next tier, and the next tier? So you think are you suggesting that that's an inappropriate way to set our water rates so that those who consume more pay at a higher rate for the marginal water? Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm not saying that 100%, but it is, it can progress, and it varies from winter to summer. And those who use more pay more, I get that, but it's already hit the people who don't use that. It's already gone up. And I don't want to see anything else compounded on top of the water rates. So once again, I'd like to bring it back in August, and we can look at what does it actually look like.
Councilor Bloom?
Yeah, thank you. I certainly support it coming back in August, specifically to look at the streets angle. Obviously Scott would be the man and kind of go back and forth and see what options exist. And then I would add too, I don't think that Councilor Duquesne was necessarily saying that the rate structure was bad. I think what she was saying is that the rates are high for everybody. And yes, it is a progressive rate structure because there is increase, right, for the higher usage, which is good. But regardless, even if you're using the smallest amount, that is an increase. And right now, every penny counts. And I think that it's important that we all acknowledge that.
Sabrina?
So not to add fuel to the fire with the discussion, but one thing we should probably discuss, because this has come up a few times, outside of rates, which council has set up to be progressive, so those who utilize more pay more, which is fairly typical. Our flat fees, you all have highlighted, are regressive. So the wildfire fee, public safety, and parks. And so one thing that you can consider potentially having a study session on or discussing is the use of a levy as opposed to a flat fee. So levies are property tax based versus no matter who you are, you pay $7 for wildfire, for example, regardless of whether you own your property or rent. It's just based on your utility bill. So I know this has been a concern for council with the fees, which are funding essential services in the general fund. So that is one way to get to Councilor Dale's point about services versus infrastructure, to have a conversation with the community about whether or not they want to continue funding certain services by asking the levy question.
So we are at 7:15. We've come to the end of our time, but I think we've had a good start to a conversation this evening. I think I'm seeing interest in having a deeper conversation to understand the park's relationship to food and beverage in a deeper way. Is that I'm seeing the head nods to start to lay that groundwork for that deeper conversation. I think we have a number of things that are immediate for us, which includes our facilities plan and our strategic plan. And so this seems to be an appropriate thing to lay groundwork for now so that we can have a deeper, more strategic conversation after we've handled those other couple of questions. So with that, we will go ahead and close out. We'll see everyone tomorrow night. Meeting is adjourned.